Hello folks, this is going to be a lecture on version and alias. So in AWS, when you create a lambda for the first time, what gets created is an unpublished version of that lambda. So what that means is that that particular lambda in the current state is not immutable and it can be changed. So once you are sure that your lambda is proper, what you can do is you can actually publish that piece of code. And once you do that, you get a different ARN and you get a version number as an integer. So at this current moment, your unpublished version and your version 1 are both in sync. So let's assume you want to create another version. So what you do is you make changes to your latest unpublished version, and then you deploy that you deploy that new version again. So once you do that, you get a new version created. So currently your latest and your version 2 are both in sync and they're both the same. So you can keep doing that and you can keep publishing your latest version. So at this moment of time, your version 3 and your latest version are both in sync. So let's assume you have a client and this client is currently accessing version 1 of that particular lambda. If he has to access version 2, he has to change his piece of code in the client as well, because the ARN for both of them are different. So he has to change the ARN for that particular lambda to function 2. Now alias is there to avoid that particular headache. So what alias does is that alias has a fixed ARN which is connected to the client. So in the alias itself, if you have the alias connected to version 1, you just need to update the alias to connect it to version 2, and there is no change that needs to be made at the client end. So that's the difference between alias and version. So let's go and see how the demo works. I've created a simple hello world function in lambda. So it just returns a hello from lambda. So what I will do currently, okay, so let's just check if it has any versions or alias. It doesn't have any alias, neither does it have any version. So what I will do initially is I will just change this to /v1 and I'll deploy it and I'll create a version out of this. So to do that, you can just go to actions and click on publish new version and click on publish. So this is the first version of my particular function. Now, if you go to this version, you can just click on version and click on 1. So as you can see that you can't make any changes to this code because it is immutable. However, if you go back to your latest code, you can still make changes here. So what I will do is I will create another version by just changing this name. I will save this and I'll deploy it again. Let me create a new function version from click on publish. So as you can see that I've created another version of this. So I will create one more last version. So to do that, I will go back to my latest. And I will just change this to v3. And I will save this, deploy it. And I will publish this as a new version. Now let's try to access this, invoke this particular lambda via the CLI. So one more change I have made to this particular lambda is I have updated this to v4 and I have deployed it. However, I have not published this particular latest unpublished version of this lambda. So let's try to invoke all these functions. So if we were to invoke the latest unpublished version of that particular function, lambda function, you just need to give the function name. So the function name is function. So if I copy this and if I paste it here, and the output goes to response.json. So let me just cat So as you can see that this is version 4. So this is the latest unpublished version for this particular lambda. So let's do one more thing. Let's invoke the first version of this particular lambda. First published version, should I say. So for this, if you want to invoke a published version, you have to give the complete ARN name. So this is the name of the function and this is the first version of that. So I just copy this and I'll paste it here. And if I do a cat for that response.json file, you can see that it's pointing to the first published version of that particular AWS Lambda. So now let's create a alias and see how that works. So to do that, you can go to the function in AWS console, click on create alias. Here you just need to give the name for that alias. So I'll give this as prod. And here I can just give the version that I like. So the $latest is the unpublished version and 1, 2, 3 are the published versions. So what I'll do is I will initially give it 1, or should I say I'll give this as 2 and I will save it. So to invoke this particular alias, all that you need to do is you just need to change it to prod. So this is function name and this is the alias name, that is prod, that I gave initially while creating the alias. So let me just copy this. And if I paste this here, and let me do a cat.response. So you can see that it's currently, the alias is pointing to the second version, v2. Now what I will do is I will change the version to v3. So to do that, you can just go back to your alias. You can see that it's pointing to the alias prod. All that you need to do is you just need to edit the version here. So I will edit it, or should I change, should I say I'll change it to version 3 and I will save it. So again, while invoking this particular alias, I don't need to make any changes to the input. So I can invoke the same alias as before. And now the only difference is that this particular prod alias is pointing to the third version of that lambda. So if I do a cat.response, you can see that it's currently pointing to version 3. One more important aspect about alias is that you can't have an alias pointing to another alias. It has to point to a function. I'm sorry, it has to point to a version. So that's how alias and versions work. If you have any doubts, please don't hesitate to ping me.